All right. Good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. All right. Welcome to week number 5. You guys excited? No? Very excited? Well, here's the good news. You guys are lucky. Week 5 is usually like a recap of jQuery and JavaScript. You guys already got that break. So that's like 2 weeks in a row that you are going to be still working on JavaScript. So there's no, well, I wouldn't say there's no new concept on, let me walk you through what we are going to be doing this week. Today is mostly revision. We will divide into groups and kind of work on some of the problems that we have already seen. This is, but this way it's going to be a little bit different. But the problems or the activities that we will do today is nothing new. They are already up. The solutions are there and everything, and I'll walk you through what the purpose of those things are. Okay, but this is mostly like a revision week. On Tuesday, I'm going to introduce you some of you have already seen those functions. I'm going to introduce some more JavaScript functions related to timings, such as timeouts, kind of like a interval, those kind of functions in JavaScript. Again, it's not anything crazy. Um, and then on Thursday, again, nothing new. It's going to be more centered around the interview process. The purpose is, again, this is more like a revision week. We don't want to introduce something super crazy because week 6 and 7 are going to be super crazy. Yeah, it's we're going to look at some real world applications. We are to the point where we understand JavaScript. We know jQuery. Week 6 and 7 we are going to look at how do you interact with something called APIs. Very important, and a lot of websites kind of are created based on that. And then week 7 we are going to look at some data storage. How do we collect the data and where do we store it? We are going to look at Firebase. So we are kind of week 6 and 7 are going to be tough, and those are the 2 weeks before we start on project, and the project starts on week 8. Okay, so once you are done with those 2 weeks, you guys are ready for your first project. Okay, so again, take advantage of this week. Make sure you're caught up on your JavaScript and jQuery, because when we start week 6, I want everybody to be clear on these concepts, because the concepts that are coming on week 6 are more, I wouldn't say more practical. They are more practical, but are also a little bit more advanced and difficult. Okay, all right. Let's see, what else was I going to say? Okay. Let's see, for today, this is what we are going to do. Any questions related to JavaScript or jQuery, please go ahead and ask, and we'll go through them together as a class, and see if we can clarify some of those stuff. Towards the next part of the class is we'll divide into groups and we'll have some activities. Again, those are kind of repeat activities, and I'll go through them. That what is the purpose of those activities? Okay. Um, let's see. So I am definitely going to skip the HTML, CSS, and Git recap. Anybody has any questions? I am hoping not, but HTML. Are we comfortable with HTML, CSS, Git? Everybody able to at least pull and push from GitHub? Everybody good with GitLab? You guys are able to pull all the activities. I uploaded homework solutions for the previous one. Take a look at it, see how the solution is done. There's a video guide that I uploaded last night. All the solutions for activities until last week are also uploaded there. Okay, everybody is able to access GitLab. No issues, right? Okay. All right. Same thing with Bootstrap. You guys have been working on Bootstrap even in the current activities, right? You guys get the basic idea. Any questions around it? It's easier than writing your own CSS, right? Okay. All right. So I'm going to, we talked about the layouts and everything, so I'm going to not go through them because I'm more, this is JavaScript and jQuery. So we started JavaScript, we looked at variables, right? How do we declare variables? We saw some data types. We started with string, number, boolean, okay? And then we looked at arrays and objects also, okay? We looked at some of the functions that are built in into JavaScript. For example, console log, alert, confirm, prompt. Okay. From all of these, we use. You have seen me coding. We use console log a lot, right, for debugging purposes. Then we looked into the if then else statements, right, conditional statements, and then for loops. Okay. Any questions? Any clarification that you require from these basic concepts? Is everybody at least comfortable kind of writing, declaring variables, creating arrays, using console log? That's the more important one. If then else and for loops. Everybody get the idea of if then else and for loops? Any questions around it? Good. Okay. Then we looked at some of the advanced concept functions. Okay, we looked at functions, we looked at objects. All right, methods and functions are basically the same thing. Okay, when you create an object, they just call it methods. If you have functions inside that object, but basically they both are the same thing. It's just a variance of the name. Okay, scope is difficult, I understand. um, it's tricky, but again, most of the time when we are creating applications, and you guys did the homework, right? The most scope is if you are using let, that kind of solves a lot of the problems. And you guys probably saw you didn't have nested functions. Even some people had, and I told them, hey, take the nested function out. It was basically the concept wasn't clear. Okay, but there's no use case that you would have a nested function, at least in your homeworks or anything. You can do it without having a nested function. You can create a function outside and call it inside. Okay. um, but the more important from here is functions and the objects. Objects is extremely important. Again, the whole JavaScript is based on objects. Okay. On Thursday we did an activity where you had to parse an object. That's what we call that. You had to dig into that object and find the value of some of the objects, right? The outer web or inner web and all that stuff. Okay, that is extremely important. When we get to the week 6, right, we are going to be parsing a lot of objects. Okay, that's why that's extremely important that we understand what an object is and how do we parse an object. That's what it is called. Okay, because we will be getting objects from the internet. Somebody else would have created that object. We are going to get that object, and then we are going to parse it and get the information that we are looking for. Okay, so that's why these objects are extremely important, right? So from the right hand side, functions and objects, extremely important. Any questions around it? Everybody know how to define, declare a function, and then call a function, parameters, arguments. Okay. One of the trickier functions are the anonymous functions, and I'll kind of go over them in a while, because I want to make sure that everybody understand what an anonymous function is. Otherwise, Declaring a function, calling a function. Everybody good? I saw some of the assignments. It takes some getting used to it from creating functions. A lot of your code, even on your on key up event, if you see there's like 30 lines of code over there, those can easily be broken down into different functions. Okay. But again, it comes with practice. Usually you will see when we have coding standards at different companies, they say that your function cannot be more than 10 lines of code. Literally, that's the coding standard. That if your code is getting more than, if your function has more than 10 lines of code, this means that you have to create a different function. A lot of companies have that. Where I've worked, they between like 10 and 15 lines, they're like, oh, that's like too much code. Please go back, review the code, and see if you can create a new function out of it. Okay, that's kind of like the line. Again, it depends on how big your or how complicated your function is. But for you guys, I've seen it can easily be divided into functions. Again, as I said, first write your code, make it work, and then go back and try to see and refactor and kind of divide it into different functions. That's all. Okay. All right. Any questions on JavaScript? We looked at events, click events in JavaScript. Okay. The events that we looked at in JavaScript are as part of the vanilla JavaScript. I said, right, this is pure JavaScript using no library. Then we looked at jQuery. Okay, jQuery is a library. This means that they have a library. When we talk about library, basically that's a wrapper over something. So jQuery is a wrapper over JavaScript. Behind the scenes, it's still JavaScript, but they have wrapped it around and have kind of made it easy, just like Bootstrap. Right? Bootstrap is a wrapper around CSS. Okay, makes it easy to use CSS. Same is a concept with jQuery. jQuery kind of makes it easy to use some of those functions. For example, we saw document.ready, right? If you Google and if you try to do the same exact thing in JavaScript, it's kind of ugly. It's not as straightforward. But jQuery gives us just one function, document.ready, and that function makes sure that it does not execute any code until my document has been rendered. Okay, that's just one example. The other things we saw was how do you access those elements. You can create those elements in just one line. No need to use dot get element by ID and all that stuff. Okay, I hope you guys see the advantage of using jQuery on top of JavaScript. Okay, jQuery is just one library. There are a lot more JavaScript libraries. Again, jQuery used to be super famous like 10 years ago. I mean, it's still relevant. They keep upgrading it. They have new versions. But especially in today's world, React and Angular, they have kind of taken over. So we'll see a less and less use of jQuery. But it's a good starting point for us. At least we know one library, and then we can build on top of that. Okay, if you work at a company and they haven't upgraded their website, you will most probably run into jQuery. A lot of websites still use jQuery. Okay, all right. Any questions? Any concept that doesn't make sense from JavaScript or jQuery? Yes.
I'm trying to remember the meaning of jQuery at $sign. That just calls on jQuery or the syntax.
So in every library there should be a mechanism to invoke that library, right? And jQuery came up with a syntax dollar and parentheses. That's their syntax. So every time JavaScript code sees this, it's going to go back to that CDN, that link that you add for jQuery. Is going to go because in JavaScript there is nothing of this sort. Okay, when JavaScript sees this, JavaScript says, "Oh, I don't know what this is. Oh, but there's a link that is added into the HTML. Maybe this guy know what this is." And of course, that's where all the code is. So it refers to that. Yes. So they came up with this because this does not exist in JavaScript. They wanted something unique, and this was the unique thing that they found. Dollar and then parentheses. Okay, so anytime you see dollar and parentheses, definitely that code is using jQuery. because it's kind of jQuery related. There's no dollar parentheses in JavaScript. Okay. Any other questions? Good. Yes. Sir.
So when we change things in the HTML from jQuery, like adding divs or
Yes.
whatnot, is that common practice?
Yes.
There's, okay.
Well, common practice because there's no other way you can do it. I mean, if I want to change something on the fly dynamically and based on an event, that's the only way you can do it. Because your HTML is hard coded. It's if you write anything in HTML, it's not going to change. That's it. That's how your browser will render. There's no way you can change your HTML.
I think I was thinking more of the JavaScript homework because I wanted to build it in the JavaScript, but
Okay.
I wasn't using jQuery yet. So I would go back to the HTML and add in like the
Yeah.
HTML, but that was just JavaScript. So when we're using jQuery, I understand.
Oh, okay.
Why we would do it.
But here's the thing that everything that you are doing in jQuery, is JavaScript, and you can totally do everything. You don't need jQuery to do any of those stuff. It makes our life easier, just like Bootstrap.
Mhm.
But eventually, you can find code, and you can do the exact same thing using JavaScript without jQuery.
It was just easier for me to go
It's-
to HTML.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah. Yeah, some of the things make sense because anything that's not going to change, like the main div or something that it's not going to change ever, you create it in an HTML. Because understand HTML is hard coded. Once you put it over there, for the life cycle of that page, it's always going to be there. You cannot modify. And anything that's modifiable, you will probably put it in JavaScript. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yes, Michael.
Yeah, so sometimes when I'm looking at like an object dot something,
Mhm.
I get confused about whether that something is the name of a function or a property.
Okay. So remember I showed you if you press dot and Visual Studio kind of shows you a list. I think the purples, the pink or the purple are functions and the blue ones are the properties. Okay. And then if you're still confused, documentation, RTFM, remember? So go into jQuery, type in that, it will show you if it's a function or a property.
Okay.
Either jQuery documentation, and if it's JavaScript function, then go to MDN, Mozilla Developer Network. They have the whole documentation, and they will tell you if it's a property or a function.
Okay, so outside of like the text editor, there's
Yeah.
really no way of knowing other than looking it up.
Yes, yeah. That's how you will find it. Yeah, because you're right. I mean, there are so many functions and properties, and I can't remember. I can't keep a track of all of them. If I see some, that's how I would do it. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Before we start on activities, nobody had asked me this, but I'm still going to callbacks. I know nobody asked this, but I'm pretty sure people are still confused about callbacks. Am I right or not? Or do you guys understand callback? Callbacks is probably the most difficult concept in JavaScript, and unfortunately for us, it's also the most used concept in JavaScript. I'm telling you, week number 6 and 7, we'll be just doing callbacks. So that's and it is useful because of the nature that how JavaScript is built. There is actually no way getting around other than using callbacks. Okay, but again, we looked at it. I'm going to show you. We're not going to create a callback function. Eventually, we will get to a point where we have to create callback functions. Right now, I'm just going to go through the concept one more time. I'm going to show you functions that exist in JavaScript that use callback functions. So we are going to see how to use these callback functions, because until now, even your project one, we are just going to be using callback functions. Okay. After that, we will take a look at it, how to create these callback functions. For now, we just need to understand how to use these callback functions. Okay. Now, what is a callback function? So consider an example. Let's suppose you're working on your homework. All right. Um, you have, let's suppose, 5 questions on your homework, and you get to the question number 3, and you are stuck over there. You're like, well, I don't know what to do about it. Okay. So what do? You call your friend. You're like, hey, I am on question number 3, and I'm kind of stuck. I'm not sure how to proceed. Okay. So your friend is, let's suppose, still on question number 2. They haven't reached question number 3 yet. So the friend says, you know what? I'm not there yet, but when I get to question number 3, I'm going to call you back. Okay? Stress on call you back. Right? This is exactly what a callback function is. Okay? So your friend says, oh, I'm going to call you back when I get to question number 3, and then you hang up. And later on, when your friend gets to question number 3, they call you back. Okay, and they're like, oh, I'm on question number 3. Now, irrespective whether they solve the question 3 and then they call you, or as soon as they get on that, that's not relevant over here. As soon as question number 3 comes up, they will call you back. Okay? Yes.
Or are you just saying a function is used again and again? Like,
Right, I'm going to come to that. Yeah, I'm going to first. This is the scenario, right? You guys understand the scenario? You get to a point where you. So these are 3 questions, right? You get to this point, and that's where you need help, and you call a friend, and your friend is saying, "Hey, I'm on question number 2 right now, okay? But as soon as I get over here, I'm going to call you back, okay?" That's the scenario. Now, how does this translate into our JavaScript callback functions? The first thing is we need to understand what a callback function is. Like, what is this term? What do we mean by a callback function? So when you define or declare a function, right, you have parameters, right? And those parameters can be a string, number, boolean, objects, arrays. They can also be functions. Does everybody understand what I meant by that? Okay, so for example, if I have a function, um, let's say function func one. Okay, within the parentheses, these are parameters, right? They can be of type string. Well, this is not valid syntax. I'm just typing it out. Could be a number, boolean, array, object. All right, it could be any one of them or all of them. It doesn't matter. In addition to that, this parameter can also be another function. Okay? When you have a function that is expecting another function as an argument, this function is called the callback function. That's what a callback function is. When you hear the word callback function, this means that you are passing another function as an argument to this function. So let's suppose I have defined func2 also somewhere. Func2. Okay, it doesn't take any parameter, it doesn't matter. Okay, so at some point in my code, if I call function 1 and I pass function 2 as an argument, why? Because that's the requirement for calling a function 1. Okay, function 2 is known as the callback function. Okay, that's what callback function means. So in this case, func2 is callback function. Okay, so that's the important point to remember. Anytime you hear callback function, this means that you are calling a function, for example, in this case, function 1, and you are passing the argument for that function. Function 1 is another function. That's what a callback function means. Okay, we'll see what it does and what's the case. But the first thing is we understand that any function that you pass as an argument, this is an argument, right? Okay, any function that you pass as an argument, that function is called a callback function. Okay, any questions on the definition first? I want to clarify that we understand what a callback function. Yes.
Yeah, so you have function two defined on line one. Would it be possible for you to have it defined within your other function?
No. I mean, you can define it, but it's not going to work this way. Why? Because I am passing my this thing says that I need to my function one. What is the requirement for function one? It requires another function. Okay. Now from this case, JavaScript doesn't know. That's a detailed description that at this point it could be a string number. I don't know. But let's suppose this has to be a function, right? And the requirement is that I have to pass in a function, right? If you define a function inside it, that's something totally different. That becomes a nested function. That's something different. Okay. The only thing is, consider this, that you have created a function called function one. Okay. And as a parameter, it is expecting another function. Okay, that's the requirement. All right. So when you call this function function one, you need to pass a parameter, an argument, which is another function. And the function two, by definition, it becomes the callback function. That's the definition of callback function. Yes.
This is probably just a very good example of it, but the fact that you use function two in the definition of function one, does that mean it requires function two or just a function?
Oh, just a function. Yeah, yeah. You can change this to callback function. Yeah, it doesn't matter. That's just the name of the argument. Okay. And you will see this more often when you look at the documentation. You will see they generally call callback function just to indicate the user what the expectation is, or sometimes you will see lazy programmers calling it CB, right? That's the indication that I'm expecting a function as an argument. And since this function by definition is called a callback function, so they use the word callback function just to indicate and just to tell the users that what the expectation is. Because from JavaScript perspective, at this point, this could be a string, number, boolean, it doesn't matter. But from the documentation perspective, you want to tell people how to use this function. So that's why you have a clear name over here so that people understand what's going on. Okay, so that's the first definition of callback function, and I want to make sure everybody understand what when we talk about callback function, what it means. It means that the function as an argument, you are passing another function as an argument. And that function then becomes what we call a callback function. That's all the callback function definition is. Okay. Any questions? Because next I'm going to show you how to call and how to use these functions. That's a little bit more difficult, but everybody understands the definition. Okay. So next time when I talk about callback functions, please understand that what I'm saying is I'm passing another function as an argument, and this function I'm calling the callback function. Okay. All right. One more time. So functions can take again, I'm using two words, parameters and arguments. Is everybody clear on that? Okay. So when I define a function, I call these things as parameters. When I'm calling a function, I'm calling this as an argument. That's all it is. Yes.
So I do have one question about parameter arguments. So when you have like an event function, so let's like on key up, since you're never really calling that function, is it considered an argument or a parameter?
Since you are not calling.
You never have to call like an event function, right?
So what? Tell me the syntax. So it's document dot on key up.
Sure. Yeah. One that we have to.
Okay. Let's see. I'm saying if it shows up. No. Okay. And then equal to function and event. So what are you doing over here? Are you calling or are you defining the function? Mm. So this is another syntax, right? Remember how do we, this is one syntax, and if I want another syntax, I would say var function 1 is equal to function.
So when you're calling it, it's when you actually press the key, when you're calling the function. It's just
Right.
in your code.
Right. It
So
just
that way
matter.
the argument is the key itself.
Yes.
Okay.
You got it. So you answered your own question. Right? You got it? So this is still, I know it kind of looks weird. Technically, this is saying that you are wiring that function because this is an event. But again, you will see people calling this as a parameter and argument interchangeably. It's not a big deal. It's still fine. I mean, even if you say that as a parameter instead of argument, I will understand that. Any other engineer is going to understand what you're talking. But when you're declaring, it's good to know the difference between those two things. Again, in real life, you will see people just use one of them and they kind of stick with them. Oh, I'm passing a parameter. Oh, I'm creating a function with this parameter. Kind of use interchangeably. But there's a difference, and I like to, if somebody asks you in an interview, hey, do you know what the difference between parameter and argument is? That's the difference. So you should at least know. But when you're talking, it's fine. You can use any one of those terms. Okay. All right. Any questions on the callback concept? At least what am I talking about when I say callback function? Okay, it means that this function is an argument to another function, and this is called a callback function. Okay. All right. So how does these callback functions work? So we'll take a look at an example, and this is your JavaScript for each function. Okay. Some of you might have already used this. I'm not sure. I introduced in one of the activities. I think there's a solution for that, but I'll go through it in a bit detail so you guys understand what this is. Okay. So this is a little bit more advanced function other than a for loop. Okay. What does for each do? For each loops through an array. Okay. How do you loop through an array? Use a for loop. All right. For each is another little bit more advanced way that you can loop through an array. Okay. Now, before we start typing anything for each, let's take a look at the documentation. So I'm going to the official MDN documentation. All right. Let's look at the syntax. Okay. So if you look at the syntax, this is how it reads. It says ARR, which is an array. Okay. For each works on an array. Array dot for each. And what is the expectation? The argument is a callback function. Okay. Now, from our definition, we understand now what a callback function is. It's just another function that is being passed as an argument. So when I call my for each method or function that is defined in JavaScript, I need to pass in another function. Okay. Okay. So now let's go back and start coding this part. Let's create an array. So that I can loop through this array. Let's create an Avengers array. Oops. Although this might not be the case anymore soon. Oh. Let's add one more. So this is my array, and then if I want to loop through this array, I would use a for loop, right? For loop and loop through this array, and it will console log everything, right? But I'm not going to use a for loop. I'm going to use the for each function from JavaScript. All right. Now from the syntax, it says array dot for each, right? So this is the indication that you need to put in the name of your array and then call this function. Okay. So my name of the array is Avengers. So I'm going to say Avengers dot for each. Okay. And Visual Studio also has similar documentation. They're kind of pulling it from probably like MDN or some other site. But you see the first parameter it's saying is a callback function. Okay, so this tells me that when I call for each, I need to pass in a function. Okay, now do I have that function right now? I don't have that function. Okay, so I'm going to create a function and then I'm going to pass that function inside it. Okay, so we'll create a function. Let's call it for each callback function. Okay, this is not the right name for it, but we'll come back and change it. But just for you guys, so that you guys can understand that I have created a function, right? And I'm going to pass that function in this. Okay, so this is how you call, or how you use a function that requires a callback function. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, I looked at the documentation. I saw that for each requires a callback function, which just means that I have to create a function and pass that function to my for each, and that's what I created a function and then I pass that function. Okay, now let's look at the documentation. This is not complete. In the bottom, you will see that they have callback function. We understand this part. There's a little bit indentation, and then you have three more things. Okay, what are these three things? What is current value, index, array? What are these? These are, huh? No. Well, but generally, what are these called? What is this saying? Arguments. Let me make it bigger. All right. So remember, our functions. When you create a function, it has. They're kind of using interchange. It has parameters, right? When I create a function, it has some parameters. Okay. So this callback function, the documentation is saying, hey, first of all, I need a callback function. So I went ahead and created a callback function. Okay. Now the documentation is saying this function that you create needs to have these arguments or these parameters. Doesn't matter. Okay. It needs to have this. So it is basically defining how your function should look like. Okay, and this is extremely common. Any documentation that expects a callback function, they will define what you have to do. How do you create a function? So you're going to create a function, and that function is going to have three parameters. These two are optional, so you can skip them, but this is required. You need to have this in your function that you define. Now, how do I do that? I go back to my function and I look at the documentation. They're saying, oh, the callback function that you create needs to have at least this, and these two are optional. Okay, but I'm not going to worry about, I'm going to create all of them. Current value, index, and array. Okay. Everybody can see it? I wasn't on, it was taking like 2 lines, so that's why I kind of zoomed out. Okay, do you see what I did? So from the documentation, they're saying for each requires a callback function, which means it has to be a function. That's all it means. Okay, so I created a function and then I passed to it. Now the documentation says the function that you're creating needs to have 3 parameters. The first one is current value, the second is index, the third is array, and from these two are optional. What this means is you can skip them. It's okay. I'm still going to work, but this is mandatory. If you don't give me this, I'm not going to work. That's what it means. So let me go and put the optional ones back. All right, any questions? I'm going through this really slowly, trust me. Okay, any questions? Do you understand what I did? Okay, now the question for you is, does it have to be current value? Can I do CV? Will this still work or not? Can I do this? Can I make the, oops, not 1. Can I make this ARR? Is this still applicable? Yes. Okay. This is the full name to give you the context what it means, right? You can define this anything. The name doesn't matter. Okay. When you are defining a function, remember they call it callback, but I am calling it for each callback function, right? The documentation is just indicating that it has to be a callback function. It doesn't matter what you name it. So I can name it whatever I want. The same thing over here. It's saying it needs to have 3 parameters or arguments, right? But it doesn't matter what you name it. You can name it anything you want, but this is what each one of them means. Okay? So the name over here does not matter. All right? You can do a CV, I, ARR. It's still going to work. Yes. Say that again, please. Square brackets. Okay. So once you get to know the documentation, the square bracket represents the optionals. So these are optional, so that's why they have it in square bracket. It's just a way we had developed the standard. Okay, and so in the documentation, if you see a square bracket, this basically means that these are optional parameters. So if you skip that, right, your function still looks fine. So that's why this comma is also in square bracket. Okay, good question. All right, so everybody clear on this? The name doesn't matter. All right, now, but what matters is the order. Okay, and we'll see that the first parameter is always going to be current value, no matter what you name it, right? And this is the current element being processed. So the first, anything that you define first is always going to be considered the current value. The second is always going to be considered index, which is going to be a number. The third is always going to be considered an array, which is going to be the whole array. Okay, so if I change this to I and CV, now my I variable is going to have the current value. My CV is going to have the index number. It doesn't matter what the name is, but the order does matter. The first is always going to be the current value. The second is going to be the index. The third is going to be the array. Again, this is from the documentation. So it follows the order definitely. The name, it doesn't matter. If you want to really confuse somebody, you can put index over here. Okay, and call this current value. But from the definition of the documentation, it doesn't matter what the name is, but the order does matter. The first one is always going to be the current value. The second one is going to be a number, which is going to be an index. And the third is always going to be an array. Okay, the order does matter. The name, not so much. So let's go back and fix it. Call it current value index. Okay? Any questions on this? Because now we are getting to the part where what does these mean? What is this going on? Okay? Any questions? Good? All right. So here's the part. Now, what is going on? What does a callback function do? We remember the homework, the example that I gave, you call somebody up. So the callback functions, so this is the for each function, okay? Now for each function is defined by JavaScript, and behind, we are just calling this function, right? There's definitely a definition behind the scenes, right? Somebody, JavaScript has defined this function. We don't know what it is doing, okay? But any function that you pass in, what JavaScript does is at some point in time, it calls that function. Okay? It calls you back. Remember, your friend is going to call you back at some point. This is exactly what this function is doing. At some point in time during the code, it probably has some code behind the scenes. Let's see what that code, I don't know what that code is, but let's suppose it's something like this. Okay, and then it's expecting a callback function, so we'll call it CB, callback function. So at some point in code, it's doing something just like your friend is working on that code, doing something, still doing something, and then at some point when it is ready, it's going to call that function. This is what's going on behind the scenes. Okay, so well, this is not exact definition of what for each is doing, but you get the idea that somewhere in JavaScript this for each is defined and it is expecting a callback function as a parameter. Okay, at some point it does something, it's doing something. At some point in time, it's going to call the function that you're passing. Okay, and when it calls this function, what's going to happen? So this is the function that you pass in. Okay, at some point it's going to call this, so it's going to call this function, the function that you have defined. So anything that you do inside this function is going to start executing. Okay, and this function is actually being called with these three values. So it's going to call with CV, index, and then array. Okay, so somewhere JavaScript already has these variables defined. I don't know what they're calling it. It doesn't matter. Okay, but what it's going to do is it's going to call the function that you pass in and given these three arguments. Okay, these two are optional. So if you define a function without these two, um, this is still okay, and JavaScript is fine with it. But if you skip this, it's going to complain. It's going to say there's no function exists that you have passed in that is taking no arguments. The function that you have defined that I'm going to call needs to have at least one of them. So this is what's going on behind the scene. The JavaScript is calling a function that you pass in exactly like this. Okay? Any questions? This is extremely important to understand what is going on. Why? Right now we are just using callback. We don't care how for each is working. We are just using for each, right? We don't really need to know behind the scenes how for each is written. But at some point we are going to be creating these functions. Okay? Not right now, maybe after project 1, but we are going to be creating these functions. Okay? Behind the scenes, this is what is going on. All right? Any questions? Okay, no questions? Oh, I must be getting good at this. Okay, so I'm going to comment this out because that's not the actual definition of for each, but that's what JavaScript is doing. Okay, so remember JavaScript calls your function, so it's going to call this. Now what can I do with these values? These values are coming from JavaScript now, right? Why? Because JavaScript does something, probably creates a variable, CV, okay, and gives the current value somehow. It probably has another variable called index, and it's setting the index to something. Something is doing something, but I don't have to worry about that. All I know is that from this array, when I call my for each on this array, it's going to give me three values for each element. It's going to give me the current value, it's going to give me the index number of that, 0, and then the whole array. For some reason, it gives the whole array. I don't know why it does, but it gives you the whole array. We'll console log and see. Okay? Then it's going to go back and execute the for each again for the second one because my array is still going on. At this point, it's going to give me the current value, Spider-Man. It's going to give me the index number, which is 1, and then the whole array. Same with Black Widow. Current value, Black Widow, index number 2, and then the whole array. Now, what I choose to do with that, that's up to me. Okay, I can do a console log. Right now, it's pretty simple, so we'll just console log this. Okay, console log index number 2, console log the array. Okay, so we can see what is actually happening. Let's do it in one line. I'm going to do it the difficult way, and then if you guys are interested, I'll show you the new way to do the same, adding all these up. Let's see. So I'm going to call index, and then this will be index all in one line, and then I need let's see, array. I'm going to show the array as well. So it's going to show current value. Let's add some space, index, and then space. So the dash, so you can see. It's going to print everything in one line now. Okay. Let's forget about this. I'm going to move this down so you guys don't see that part. Okay. So now what's going to happen? I'm calling the for each function, expects a callback function, and this is my function. The callback function from the documentation, they have defined it needs to have 3 parameters. 2 of them are optional, but let's consider all of them. And then at some point for each is going to call this. Right now I'm just doing console log, but I have access to all these things, and I can do much more than console log. Maybe I'm doing an if statement, I'm performing some actions on the current value. All of this can be done in this function. Has to be done in this function. It cannot be done anywhere else because I don't have access to this. Okay. Now if I run this, it should console log everything. Do I have my HTML connected? Yeah, it's good. Okay. All right, see what's going on? So the current value for each is called for every single element in the array. The first parameter is the actual value of the element, and it gives you the index number. And then it just gives you the whole array. Usually you will see people skip the array part. This is, both of these are optional, but you will see people skip this because I don't have any use. I'm not going to use this array inside my function, so usually people. But I wanted to show you what's the value in each one of them. You have access to the whole array. Okay. The same thing with the second one, right? It's a for each. Okay, so it's going to go through each one of the elements. Okay, shows you the current value, index number, and then the whole array. Okay, let's go ahead and skip this. Okay, this is more important, and most of the time these 2 things are used a lot. Okay, but again, you have the array access to the whole array for some reason if you need the array. There might be some cases I can't think of it right now, but if you come across, you have access to the whole array. Anyway, all right, questions? Yes, yes. What was that? Arg? R. Oh, the array?
It was like telling me what to use as this part.
Okay, so this is, I won't go into it right now. If you see, this is actually second parameter other than the callback function. Okay, to be honest, I have never used it, and I have to look at it what this means. But you can put it over there and console log and see what comes up. So it's the syntax is the same. Once you're done with your callback function, just put in another function, another argument, and console log and see what it is. Okay, I haven't actually used it, but I can console log and see what it is and talk about it, and we can come back to it. But that's a little bit advanced right now. I'll come back to it and we can console log and see what that is. Okay, but anything related to callback functions or anything. So do you understand how I use this? Good. Okay. So the last part is we define these functions because we are trying to reduce some footprint, right? We have a lot of code and we divide it into functions. But the important point to remember is if there's any piece of code that you're going to be calling again and again and again, that's where the functions come to help. Okay? If I'm going to call this function multiple times in the code, then it's valid to create a function. Okay, do it like this and then pass it over here. But usually when you are using callback functions, their lifetime is only one time. You only call this function once and then you never use in the code. Okay, again, there's no hard and fast rule that you have to do it, but usually we'll say all callback function, the lifetime is they are only relevant at this point and nobody else calls these functions anymore. Why? Because remember, your for each is the one who's setting the requirement. None of my code requires this function. Okay, I'm not going to use this function anywhere else. Why? Because I'm only creating this function because for each requires it. Okay, so if you have functions that you are never going to use it again, the syntax is replaced with what we call anonymous functions. What anonymous function means is that you define a function right there and then, and that's it. It does not exist anywhere else. The life cycle of anonymous function is limited to just one call and it's done. Okay? And when we talk about callback functions, you will see syntaxes using anonymous functions. Again, the same reason, because the requirement to create this function is just for this. I don't need this function anywhere else in my code. The reason I'm creating this function is because for each is mandating me that, hey, I need a callback function, so you need to create a function. Okay? So what generally you will see is same syntax for each, and this requires a callback function. That's where the anonymous function comes in. Anonymous function do not have a name, so you say function, parameters, and then the body. Okay, and what are the parameters required? Current value, index, okay, and the function body has that console log, right? So same thing that I did. Okay, instead of defining a function somewhere in my code and then calling it, you can just define and call the function right here and then, and that's called the anonymous function. Generally, you will see people doing this. Again, the reason is this function is only valid for just for each. I'm never going to use it. Usually the callback functions, you don't reuse those callback functions. Why? If I had a function that I wanted to reuse, it wouldn't be a callback function. It would be related to my code. But the reason I'm creating this function is just because for each is saying, oh, I need a function, so go ahead and give me a function. And that's the reason I defined that function. Okay? This is lines 12 and 14 is a shortcut, is a short form of the same thing that we did over here. Okay? Generally, if you see this, this is how the syntax. And remember from jQuery also, right? Dollar document dot ready. What is how does it work? Dollar document dot dot ready. What is dot ready expecting as a parameter? A callback function. That's why you see we have function something something, right? This is how we do the dot ready function, right? So by definition, this is a callback function, and you could have done this thing as well over here. You could have defined a function on document ready, okay, and then on document ready, the same thing. All right, then you have all your code that you write in your jQuery, everything is over here. Okay, but generally you'll see that we are using dot ready and we create an anonymous function and just call that function. Okay, now when I was learning JavaScript years ago, I preferred this syntax. It was more appealing to me. I was like, coming from a different programming language like Java, I was like, this kind of makes more sense to me, you know, instead of doing this anonymous function. But it was a natural progression as you get more practice. you will see you will naturally kind of drift into this syntax. Now, if I look back, I'm like, I don't know why I even did this. This is so much code. This looks a lot more simpler to me now. But when I was starting, I will accept that this is what I preferred. Okay. But eventually, I kind of got used to it because JavaScript, any documentation you are looking, any examples you are looking, all of them use anonymous. I have rarely seen somebody doing this in any documentation. Okay. I think if you do it and you publish on internet, people will come out with pitchforks and like commenting and saying, "What is this?" Maybe they are afraid to use it. But generally, you will see this is how examples are. This is how the libraries are. They all use anonymous functions. If the requirement is to use a callback function, okay? Anonymous functions are famous because of these callback functions. All right, question. There's no way you guys got this. You guys understood this? Okay. Right now? Yes, Michael.
If we're looking console log your line 9, you would also hit undefined? Right now,
Line number 9.
yeah.
So you are probably missing. Is there a typo? You have the names correct and everything. We can take a look at it. It's probably typo or something is missing. It shouldn't give you an undefined. Or are you doing console log avengers.for each? Do you have a console log here?
Yeah.
Again, it's the same. Remember previous weeks ago, if you console log this and you're console logging this also. So you need to have console log inside over here, not over here. For each doesn't return anything. You are console logging something that returns, right? If you console log over here, this is for each returning anything. At this point, we understand the return, right? For each is not returning you anything. So that's why it's going to say, if you do this, oops. Okay, what am my expectation? I'm saying that console log this thing is for each returning me anything. It's not returning, it's a void. It doesn't return you anything. Right? So it's going to console log undefined. Because you are saying console log this thing. And is for each returning you anything, it's not returning anything. It's just a loop. It doesn't return you anything. Okay? So that's why it's giving you undefined. So you need to put in your console log inside your callback function and not outside. Because for each does not return anything. It's void. Again, if you look at the let's show up over here. Let's see. You see this void written over here? Void. You will see that this means it's not returning anything. And console log is going to console log anything that is coming back. So that's why it gives you undefined. I think we had the same issue like a few weeks ago when we were doing, I don't know which exercise was that. Yeah, I felt so something. Yeah. All right. Questions? No questions? Getting it? Okay. So this is why I want to go over it because we already saw jQuery, right? Remember jQuery document.ready, those events. If you go back and look at them, all of them are using callback functions, right? The events dollar on click. I think it's somebody help me with the syntax if I do this wrong. So I have, let's suppose I have some class, right? This is jQuery. I don't have added. It's not going to run. Then I have dot on. Okay, and then dot on. I have my first argument is click, and the second argument is what is the second argument? Function. But what do we call that function now? What is it? Callback function. Basically, there are two answers. Either it's an object or a callback function. I'm telling you that's probably those. So if I ask, you have 50% chance saying object or callback function. Okay. Over here, yes, it's a function, but now we know what it is. It's a callback function, and that's why we use that anonymous function syntax, and you do something like this, and then you write your code over here, right? It's a callback function. This on function is expecting a string and a callback function. Okay, so callback functions are basically the foundation of JavaScript. You will see these callback functions a lot. All right. We'll see what are the advantages and why these are when we get to week 6. They have to do with the async nature of JavaScript, and we'll take a look at it. But for now, we are using these callback functions. So anytime you see this, understand that this is a callback function. And I could have written this exact same thing in a different way, and that different way would be creating a function somewhere on the top, function on click, right? And then I could call this function over here on click. Okay, same thing, but we generally, you won't see me doing it, or in examples you see, you won't see this in the examples, because again, people go for the anonymous function, that's why they are. But at this point, you should understand that this thing and calling anonymous function are the same thing. Okay? Any questions? Yes. What is it? Not over here? Yeah, when you're calling a callback function, no parentheses. Okay? And no parentheses, no arguments, no parameters. Again, why? Because somewhere behind the scene they have already hard coded this that you are going to pass it. If you don't pass, it's going to give you an error. It's not going to work. So that's why they are saying, oh, it's irrelevant or redundant to tell me, because I already know what you're going to give me. If you don't give me that, I'm going to give you an error. So that's why no parentheses, no nothing over here. Unless it's the anonymous one, yes. So in the anonymous one, you will just like this. Then you're going to have this thing. Again, why? Because it doesn't have a name. This is your definition. So instead of parentheses over here, I'm putting parentheses over here. When you're using the anonymous function, you're basically defining your function. So you would say function, parentheses, whatever values you're expecting. Yes, Goose, you had a question. Let me come to this. Yes. Yeah, you can do it. There's no limit to it. There's a term for it. It's called callback hell, and you will write. It's a infinite loop. You will. Yeah, you can do it. You can call back into a callback into a callback. Yeah, try that sometime. Yeah, you're going to love it. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Okay. This was a good time. That's why I spent so much time on callback function. Usually we don't get this opportunity, but I've seen that this is one of the most difficult concept to understand, and unfortunately one of the foundation for JavaScript also. We're kind of trending from basic JavaScript and kind of getting into real world examples. This is how JavaScript is actually used. These callback functions, modifying your HTML, even in jQuery, you see all of these are callback functions. We were already using it, we just didn't understand. But after this, I'm hoping everybody understand and able to recognize every time you see this thing, this is a callback function. Okay? All right, any questions? Yes,
So the for each that we went through,
for each. Yes.
a good example. There's a jQuery shortcut for that too, right?
What is that? What's the jQuery shortcut?
It's I haven't looked super far into it, but that's just more so we could see what callback function is, but there should be shortcuts for the ones that are already.
Oh, you want a shortcut for this?
Yeah.
There's no shortcut for. I mean, this is equivalent of running a for loop in JavaScript.
So
Uh,
there's no shortcut for it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. jQuery has something. It's called $.each. Take a look at it. Okay, but that each is going through your elements. It finds in. I think this is the right syntax. Is this the right syntax, or is it dollar? Let's say div dot each, and then a callback function. So I'm going to use anonymous function, something like this. Okay, this means it's going to find all the divs in your HTML and it's going to go through each div. So basically, in your HTML, you're going to have something like div ID div1. Oh, HTML works in JavaScript. Oh, that's cool. Okay, so I'm going to have, let's suppose somewhere in your HTML you have multiple divs, and all of them have different IDs. Two, two, two. Okay, so if you use this in jQuery, what does this mean? What does $div does? It finds your div, right? It goes and tries to find how many divs is it's going to find. It's going to find 1, 2, 3, 4. Dollar each is going to say, go through each one of the divs and do something. I don't know what you want to do. Maybe you want to insert some elements, but that's what the jQuery dollar each does. It's kind of loop, but it's a loop for your HTML elements. But the concept behind it is still the same. Dot each is expecting a callback function, and in this case, the function doesn't require any parameters. I think that is the correct. Look at the documentation. If it requires, there it is. I think it doesn't require any parameters. Oh, okay. So index and element. So you would do index and like this. Okay. So index will tell you index of this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it will give you the exact line over here. That's what it does. Okay. So they both are different. Dollar each in jQuery is used to loop through your elements. The for each is used in JavaScript, is used to loop through an array. So both have different functionality. All right. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So what are we going to do for the remainder? We'll take lunch break at 12 at noon, noon to noon 45. So we are going to do some projects, but these are again. I'm going to slag these projects out, and the TAs will send out your groups. But before you get into the groups, I want to. The purpose of this is okay. So these are some of the selected activities or homeworks that we have already done. All the solutions are there, but the purpose of them is, as a group, pick one of them that you think is most difficult to your group, or something that you want to do it again. Okay. For example, you come back and you say, "Hey, I want to do the fridge game." Okay, as a group. Start with even the bootstrap. Okay, look at the output, run the solution, and see on your web page how it looks, right? But start with your bootstrap. Even create the bootstrap. Start from scratch. Don't start with the template that we did in the class. Start from writing your bootstrap. Start from putting that image over there, and then jump into the is this jQuery or JavaScript? I can't remember. jQuery. Then jump into the jQuery. Write jQuery, everything from scratch. Okay. Again, this is so that we can get into the habit. Right now, the template is there. A lot of people kind of skip it or skim through the bootstrap, and they're like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to do this. A lot of things are getting missed. So I want you guys to look at the solution. Solution as in the rendered solution. Run the solution, shows up the fridge. Okay. Now take that and then make a same copy of it, right? See how would you do it in Bootstrap? How would you create that fridge? And then how would you do, then complete the jQuery behind it. Same thing with the lottery generator. Okay, there was a challenge exercise. I don't know if anybody did it. I have the GitLab link. I think it's part of JavaScript, but I'll slag this out so you guys don't have to This is jQuery. Okay, jQuery exercise number 16. Okay, same with Captain Planet game, right? A lot of stuff was given to you. Do it from scratch. Okay, see how would you do it if you just had the screenshot and nothing else. This was probably one of the tough ones. If you guys want to pick this one, do the guess game again, this time as a group and start from scratch. Okay, this will help you see how other people did it or what was the logic. Maybe somebody else had a better logic. That will help you understand. But these are some of the projects. Get into the groups, pick one project, and we'll be working on that project from scratch. Okay. Meanwhile, I'll Slack out this README. It has all the links, and you can directly go. This is all in GitLab, so please go ahead and pull from GitLab, and then start working on it. Okay. Any questions before we start on the groups? Good. Okay. So Lee has slacked out the groups. Please check the groups, and I'm going to slack out these instructions. All right. So let's get into the group, discuss as a group, and pick out a project, and then we'll start working on it for the remainder of the class.
Chris always been What are they playing tomorrow?
Giants.
Well, yeah, they were all, they're all pretty.